Our guest this evening is Nina. She is currently a senior data analyst at Station 10. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Biological and Biomedical Sciences from the University of Cambridge. She has helped deliver Station 10's data science and data for social good offerings, and has worked with clients across multiple industries, including FMCGs, telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, and travel. Welcome, Nina. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, everyone. I was just about to start talking with my mic on.
Not a problem. We're all good. Great. So thank you very much for joining us and for your time today. We've got quite a lot to cover this evening, so we'll do our best. But first, we want to just know a little bit more about yourself and your particular journey into tech and how you came to be where you are today.
Of course. Firstly, thank you so much for organizing this and for having me. It's honestly an honor. In terms of who I am Nina. I've been a data analyst for about 6 years. I originally started out as a medical student, and I think 2 years in, I realized that it wasn't necessarily what I had thought it would be. And also, I wasn't as interested as everyone else around me, so I decided to switch to biological sciences. And when I graduated, I got a first job offer in a tech startup, which for me was a good introduction into data analytics. It kind of like introduced me in terms of how data works, what you can use data for as far from like business performance, improving how businesses work and so on. So from there, I kind of took on that interest and started learning a little bit more in my own free time around like programming and how to use Python, for example, to do data analysis. And the next job I got was more focused around digital analytics. So I worked as a web analyst, where I would report on the web performances, social media, CRM, and then from there, I discovered data science, and I kind of I fell in love a little, but I wanted to do a bit more around programmatic analytics. So for me, I kind of found another job at Station 10 where I was able to combine the two. So you work as a data analyst and you're able to understand the business that you're working with for your clients. You're also able to understand how you use their data to give them better visibility of how they're performing. And then also adding in the predictive analytics and machine learning aspects in terms of seeing where the opportunities are and using the methods to be able to automate some of the processes and give them better decision making, for example. But yeah, it's a big mixture, but I kind of fell into it and I haven't looked back ever since.
Yes, perfect. Amazing. Really interesting journey. I think you touched on something that I'd like to cover, which is this broadness of the analysts and the broadness of the skill set. I sort of want to look at you and your teams. What specifically about your job makes you a data analyst? And my second question is with regards to your team. Do they have the same skill set as you, or are they complementary? And how does that sort of look?
It's really interesting because I think when you look at data analytics as a whole, there's so many different definitions in terms of what a data analyst does, and it really depends on the company. But in Station 10, what we do is we cover the entire data journey. So we look at the data implementation, which can cover how do you set up tracking for digital platforms so you can capture the data that you need for the business. You look at data strategy in terms of how you use that information and help the businesses align their objectives with their data and be able to map how you, like, I guess, KPI framework building. So understanding how you go from a business objective to indicators that will give you that information of how you're doing. And then all the way down to like the insights and reporting, which is often what you would associate with data analytics, which is you'll take the data and produce reports to be able to say, this is how you're performing. These are the areas we have recommendations of improvement for. And then all the way down to like the machine learning and optimization. So it can vary from like A/B testing to understand what changes should you make, which options should you go with, as well as, okay, we have the data. Can we implement any models that will give us better insight into, for example, what forecasting, how much revenue we're likely to make over the next couple of months or year, propensity modeling, how do we understand if we can get better engagement from our users and be able to use the data that we have to get an indication of whether they're interested in purchasing, for example, or they're still in the early stages. So yeah, I think it really varies. And as far as skill sets, when I started out, I was very heavily focused on JavaScript and using analytics tools to be able to put together the reporting. And then as I progressed on, it became more focused around SQL to be able to get data from quite a few different data sets, and then also Python to be able to do the modeling. And you also do go back to the old reliable Excel from time to time. Whenever it's a quick analysis, sometimes it is much easier to just pull up an Excel document, run a few pivot
Yeah.
tables, get your answers, and then that's it. But yeah, it really varies. And then from our team, I think we have some people who are more focused around visualization, and that's their area of interest. And then a few people who are focused on implementation. So they tend to work heavily around JavaScript and putting together the scripts to be able to do the tracking. And then I would say my focus is mainly around the insights and the machine learning. So it's primarily SQL and Python.
Great. Okay, so that's quite an interesting entry point then, kind of building the reporting, but not really having that much to really do with the data, then moving towards actually looking at the data and why it's there and what it means.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
very cool, very cool.
And I think
So,
one thing
yeah,
one thing
go
I
for it.
often find is people think that it's all about the technical skills, but
Mm,
actually sometimes the soft skills are far more important because you need to be able to have communicate with your clients to understand what their objectives are, and it often always driven by the business objectives and the clients what it is that they want to be able to do with the data. So a lot
yes.
of the soft skills which are transferable across loads of different industries and different jobs play such a big part as a data analyst.
Yes, because you spoke a lot about actually understanding the business and using the data to help the business is not to, I guess it's an analytical skill as opposed to a coding skill,
Yeah,
and you're using your coding skills to just help be really good at that. I'm assuming looking at quite large data sets, automating certain things, um, which just helps you be a better analyst and apply your
absolutely.
mind to the important things. Okay, great. So you mentioned quite a few tools,
Yeah.
starting with your front end sort of role in web and using JavaScript. I'm quite curious as to whether JavaScript would be something an analyst should have on their CV. And then you mentioned Python and a bit of like machine learning and that kind of thing as well. So could you list for us sort of a couple of the tools you might use in your
Yeah,
job?
I would say it's less to do with the actual languages per se. It's more the understanding of how you frame the question and how you tackle an analytics problem. So, for example, there are some analysts who don't do any programming at all. They would
Mm.
primarily use tools like Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics to be able to get the data that they need. You also have some who would use visualization tools such as Tableau, Power BI, Google Data Studio to be able to do the building of the dashboards and so on. So I would say for people who are interested in getting in, don't worry too much about the languages. It helps to have an understanding of how it works, but I would focus more on understanding how to frame an analytics problem. So how do you convert the business question into an understanding of, okay, this is the data that I need, and this is what I need to do to the data to get to the insights that I need. And this is how I share it with the business or communicate it for technical and non-technical audiences.
Great. And you mentioned quite a lot of things that your job encompasses. Um,
Yeah,
if you try and distill that into a day,
yeah.
what does a typical day kind of look like for you?
It really varies, actually. I think because we do quite a lot of different areas, it really depends on the project that you're on. But
Mm-hmm.
typically, it would be at the start of a project, you would often have the discovery phase, which is where you work quite closely with the clients to understand what their needs are and how you frame the questions. So you'd often have meetings with the stakeholders to understand what their objectives are. How do they want to use that information? How will it help their decision making? And then you go back to the data. And I guess part of my day tends to be focused around extracting the data. So it's often just like putting together some SQL scripts to pull the data, having a little bit of time of figuring out like, okay, how do I approach this problem and how do I solve it? And then there'll be a couple of meetings here and there, internally and externally, to kind of give updates and figure out where we are on the projects, and so on. And then I try and book out a solid amount of time just to kind of be able to focus on work, because it's very easy to
Yeah.
get meetings sort of like put all over your calendar. So yeah, it's just a kind of a mixture of, I would say, project management and a mixture of delivery.
Yeah, yeah. Being a good communicator, I'm sure, is quite pivotal in your role as well. Who do you sort of then interact with? Like everybody, or how does
It
this work?
again, it really depends. So for me, because I'm I'm consultancy side, I often do have a lot of contact with
Mm,
my clients.
yeah,
And within the clients, you can often be speaking to the directors to understand what their objectives are. And then day to day, you'd be focusing on the point of contact. So that could be the project manager, or it could be the analyst within their business, or the developers. So you do get to kind of work quite communicate with quite a lot of different people. And I
yeah,
would say it's very similar when you're working in-house, in that your stakeholders become the other departments and the other parts of the business, but you still have that same engagement with them to be able to kind of like help each other complete a project.
great, cool. Yeah, I quite like that about this is that it's really varied.
Yeah,
Um, and you, I think if you're a people person, but you also are analytical, it sounds like the perfect role. Um,
absolutely. And I know like some people who've focused more on the client services side. So they enjoy communicating with clients quite a lot, and they enjoy being able to help them understand what their business needs are. So they focus more on the strategy side. I think I gravitate more towards the delivery. So I like being able to take the requirements, figure out how to put it together and work on the project, and then give them a delivery. I'm like, here you go. So yeah, I think you can find a role that gives you more of what you need or what your interests are, out of the two.
Great. Okay. Interesting. I wanted to ask you about data governance in terms of some of your interactions. Do you
Mhm.
interact with them? Do you do data governance? How does that slot in?
We do. So I think, especially because we work in the digital world quite a lot, ever since the GDPR came into effect, and there've been
Yes.
quite a few others that have come into effect ever since. We have had to work with our clients quite heavily to do audits and understand what exactly they're tracking, looking at how they ensure that when a user chooses not to be tracked, that they are putting those processes in place to remove them. And then
Yeah.
also cookie policies, just ensuring that they are following the guidelines, and they're not in breach of any of them. And we also work with quite a few partners that are in the space. So things like Observe Point, where they give you they've automated that process, and it makes it easier to then get the insights that you need to be able to derive recommendations on how they can improve their cookie policies, but as well as maintain compliance. And then I guess from the technical side as well, we work with quite a few of the data engineering teams to understand how they define who can access what data, and making sure that it is only the people who are authorized to do so that will be able to get access. But it is an interesting space, I find.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a similar query around ethics.
Yeah.
How relevant and how much of a role does data ethics play in your job?
Oh, that's a good one. I think most recently we've been having a lot of conversations around data ethics, and it kind of ties in with the data governance piece, being able to help clients define what they're tracking. And I think historically it was a case of, if you could track it, you should. Why wouldn't you just get everything that you can? Whereas now, people are a lot more mindful of what they are collecting, and deciding what they're going to pull through, and what they're not going to pull through, and giving transparency to end users that the information is going to be used to gather this insight, and it's going to be used primarily just for, like, say, business functions, not necessarily in terms of determining how we're going to interact with you. So yeah, I think it's really important. And then also on the side of, like, I guess, machine learning ethics, there are a lot more conversations happening around that as well. How
Definitely.
do you make sure that any models that are being deployed are they're not biasing anyone, and that they
Yeah.
are taking into account the interactions that other people will have. But yeah, it is. It's one of those things that there are a lot of conversations happening. I know there's certain people within the company who are more focused on it. I am not too involved in the conversation specifically.
Sure, sure. Okay. No, it's just another multi-facet of this role. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to ask as well about a data analyst. To me is quite a modern role,
Yeah.
and analysts. The word analyst in general is very generic for a lot of jobs. So
Yeah.
we've spoken about some of the specifics of what you do, but a much more traditional role that was sort of a precursor to the data analyst was business intelligence and the business intelligence specialist or analyst.
Yeah.
Um, how do you see your role as an evolution? Do you see them working in parallel? What would you say are some of the differences between your job and that job?
I think there still are quite a lot of overlaps. Would say perhaps the business intelligence is more focused on the data visualization and the insights and deep dive section. So they primarily look at the business perspective and how do you use the data to be able to derive the insights that you need. Data analysts are, I think they're kind of expand a little bit more. So you're also able to, or you're also expected to be able to do the technical side of deriving the, collecting the data. In some instances, setting up the tracking to be able to capture the data. In for some roles, you almost have some overlap with data engineering, where you have the a data analyst who will be the one maintaining a database and looking after the infrastructure and the pipelines that you use to be able to collect the data. But I think the overall objectives for the two are quite similar. And I think that can add to the confusion when it comes to deciding which role to go for, because it's not very clear what the distinction is.
Yes. Okay. So it's not just me.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Great. Okay. So I guess the advice there is to really try and understand the role as good as well as possible. Ask questions.
Yeah.
I think some of the naming there could also maybe indicate the approach of the company. Maybe it's a more traditional company.
Yeah,
Maybe they take slightly newer approaches. Would you say that that is
absolutely.
potentially true? Okay, great. Okay,
And I think
cool.
some teams tend to have a little bit more of a separation between the roles. So you'll have a team that focuses primarily on data visualization and another team that does the insights and a separate team
Mm.
that does the implementation. And in those instances, it helps to know what the demarcations are. So if you are interested in doing a little bit of everything, perhaps you wouldn't have the opportunity to do that. But actually, if you're interested in specializing in a particular area, then that's perfect because you're able to do that day in, day out.
Yeah, yeah, but all under the umbrella of analyst or data
Yes,
analyst.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay, very very interesting. Great. Well, thank you very much for that. I'd like to go into our first quickfire round
God, I've
and
been
shake
nervous
things
about
up.
these for a while.
No, you're going to be great. So, what we do in this round is we just throw out a couple of random questions and say whatever comes to mind. There are no right or wrong answers. Rightio. Do you like cats or dogs better?
I think I like cats better.
Nice. Do you have a cat?
I used to as a kid, but my mom refuses to get one now. So
Oh dear.
it's
Okay.
a little bit of convincing that has to happen.
But you haven't forgotten. Okay, that's good. That's good. A country that you'd love to visit that you have not gone to yet.
I think Turkey is on the top of my list at the moment. I love the history, and I'd love to be able to like go to the different areas and see just how people are living now and compare it to what I know of the history.
Yeah, and it's much warmer too.
Oh yes.
um, okay. A country that you've been to so far that you would say is your favorite.
Mm, I'll have to say Kenya only because I grew up in Kenya, and that for me is like where my childhood memories are. So I'm always drawn back to Mombasa specifically, where it's like nice beach, just really warm climates, and everyone is quite chilled. in general. So yeah.
Oh, it sounds lovely. Yes, yes. Take me with you, please. Thank
Oh yeah, let's go.
you. Okay, I'm ready. I've had quite another winter. What is your favorite meetup?
Favorite meetup? Oh, I have a very soft spot for AI club gendered minorities. So it's a
Yes.
data science community that kind of does workshops and promotes a lot of like, sharing of knowledge amongst women in tech and just, yeah, I don't know, everyone's just super lovely. And also Ladies of Code London.
Of course, of course. We'll take second place. That's okay. Just kidding. Yes, I have heard of them. We will include the link to that meetup in the resources that we send out after this event. Would you say that you are an early bird or a night owl?
I think naturally I'm a night owl, but I am trying desperately to become an early bird. I think it just helps when you wake up a little bit earlier and you have a little bit of time before the start of work, for example. Whereas I naturally wake up quite like late and then my brain switches on quite late in the day.
Yeah, yeah. It can be tricky. You can embrace the night owl. It's okay. It's okay. Cool. And Marmite. You're in the UK. Do you love it
Yeah,
or hate it?
I do actually really like it and I miss it. So we had Marmite in the office and yeah, that was my breakfast. I would have toasted Marmite.
Okay.
I know not many people are fans, but I do like it.
Nice. Cool. Very good. What is your favorite meal that you like to cook at home?
Uh, Grilled salmon, always. It's just so easy to make and taste really good.
Lovely and very healthy. Very nice. Could you tell us a story about a time that you've really struggled with some data and what you did about it?
Oh, when I've struggled with data, actually, I think with most projects, there's often a point where you're still trying to figure out how, especially when you're new to the data, you're trying to figure out how to use it to answer the question. That often is the bit that I find really, really frustrating. But once I do solve it, the satisfaction that just comes with like, oh, it's done. That I really enjoy. So I would say most projects, I often have that where it's just kind of banging your head against the wall, thinking, how do I put this or piece this together to get the answer that I need? And then you look away and come back and just like, actually, that was really simple. But yeah. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, perfect. And my last question is, what is a product that you wish existed?
I wish there was an AI system that could just tell me how to structure my day. And I know there are a couple of like calendar type apps that do that, but I just want one that looks at everything that I need to do over the next month and tells me you should wake up in the morning at this time and deliver this at this time and send this email at this time. And even if you could help me send those emails and do the admin, that would be more appreciated.
Yes, I'm a big fan of calendars. Cool, lovely. Thank you so much. So that's it for now, for round one. Thank you so much for your answers and hearing more about you and your interests. Very nice. What I'd like to move on to a little bit next is learning. So you didn't exactly study analysis after school.
Yeah.
What would you say that you did take from your qualification into your roles?
Well, that's interesting. I think because medicine is, especially the first 2 years, are taught in a very structured way, you kind of learn very quickly how to acquire information. So I think the main skills that I learned is how to um, take a subject, break it down into smaller parts, and then get to grips with the principles of the subject so that you can kind of add on top of it. And I think perhaps that's what's helped me quite a lot in terms of learning about analytics and how to approach analytics problems, but also just learning languages in general. Because I found that at the beginning, I was very focused on remembering the syntax and remembering all of the bits and pieces and the details. But after a while, I became more focused on learning the principles and saying the syntax and the specific details I can always Google. and Stack Overflow is like becomes your best friend. But when it comes to the actual principles and what it is that you're trying to achieve, just having an awareness of what's possible and what's not possible becomes more important. So I would say
Mm.
that's the biggest transferable skill. And then, of course, with writing essays and writing dissertations, doing analysis, because we used to do a lot of practical exams that were, or just practicals in general, that were based on doing analysis. That helped really with being able to transfer them into what I do, which is very much analyzing and then communicating the results with everyone else.
Yeah, great. Okay. Um, so we will be sending out a list of resources from Nina after this. So we aren't necessarily going to talk about anything too specific or have a rattle off a list of numerous resources. But could you give us a rundown of your quick top go-to for someone who wants to A, understand what the job involves, and B, what you would consider a good starting point?
Yeah. For good starting points, I think Data Camp, is quite good because it gives you an introduction to the different elements of data analysis. And often it has a focus on like programming and machine learning, but you can take the exploratory side of it and get a good understanding of what day-to-day data analysts would do. And then any Kaggle, of course. So in terms of getting access to data sets, it's a really good place to just find data and get a business question that comes with it. And you'll often find in the notebook section, people have entered their own data exploration. And if you have a quick read through those, you get an understanding of how people think when they're approaching these problems. So what are the things that you're looking at to be able to understand what's within the data? And then how do you translate that to be able to answer the question that's been asked of? And then if you're interested in data science, you can look onto the model building side of things. Yeah, I'd say Kaggle, and there are a lot of other online courses that kind of give you an introduction, and I'll share the links to the ones that I find quite useful.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, but those are good starting points.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. To veer slightly, you mentioned data and looking at data. Do you do quite a lot of data visualization work, or is that a different role?
I do. So
Okay.
again, because of the clients that I often have where they have needed data visualization, we would work with them to kind of do the collection side of how do we get the extraction process, which data sources can we connect to directly? If we can't, what are the manual processes that we can try and automate? And then building the pipeline to actually building the tool where they will be visualizing and interacting with quite frequently. And I tend to use Tableau and Power BI, but Data Studio is my favorite just because it's free and it's quite easy to like democratize and share with everyone.
Ah, great. Okay. I have a question coming up on those later, but I might know the answer
Cool.
already. So for visualization, you use external tools, or do you code visualizations as well?
You can code them, and actually, one of my colleagues recently built like a very quick website where you can visualize. He built the visualization. He built a very simple front end to be able to interact with. I tend to use tools because it's simpler, I find, and often we can share it with the rest of the business so they can very quickly access it. And it's a little bit more robust as far as the types of visualizations you can build and the amount of calculations that you can do. They're built to handle like a lot of computation side of things. Whereas if I'm doing it on my own, I think it would take a lot longer.
Perfect. Oh, that's useful. Very handy. If so, you've mentioned some really accessible places to go and learn from and grab data and play with. If one could do a qualification,
Yeah.
would you advise that, or would you advise a different path? And if you'd advise a qualification, what would that be?
So I'm not very familiar with the degrees and masters that are available as far as like teaching about data analytics. Now there are a couple that do business analytics, and they often come from the business schools. Um,
Right.
I would always say like if you have a purpose for it, then yes, sure. But there are so many other resources available. And there are a lot of companies that are hiring based on the potentials. If you show them that you've learned on your own, you've kind of done a few projects that where you've shown the capability of like being able to translate data, for example. I think that goes a long way, and then you can learn on the job. So once you're in a company, they would often train you based on their data set and what tools they're using. So yeah, personally, I find I learn best when I'm doing. And for me, it works really, really well if I'm learning something and then applying it right away. So for that, I always veer towards getting a job in an area that I'm interested in, or trying to find a way to incorporate what I'm learning into my day-to-day work. But yeah, there are loads
Perfect.
of
Yeah.
online courses that you can also
Great.
take that would upskill you.
Yeah. Demonstrable skills, I think, is what you hit on there, which
Yeah,
we like to hear. Because if you can show it, you can do it.
absolutely.
So if I get a hold of some of this Kaggle data and I want to build myself a portfolio,
Yeah.
what sort of projects would you advise that I show on that portfolio, and what sort of tools should I use?
I would say go with something that actually grabs your attention, or like you find genuinely interesting. So there are loads of topics on there where people will ask for, like, I don't know, social good, for example, or they'll have business based objectives. And I think whichever one grabs your attention, go with that, because often what you'll learn is the underlying principles are the same across all of them. You'll be
Mm.
able to demonstrate with all of them how you think and how you approach a problem. And then with something that you're interested in, you're more likely to go and read around the topic, which really helps when you're trying to understand a business question or trying to understand the data itself, because the context is based on the area that you're looking into. And then as far as like which tools, I often find it's a case of which one is the most accessible to begin with. So for like visualization, if I was doing this as a pet project, I'd probably go with Data Studio because it's free. You only need a Google account to be able to use it. Whereas with others like Power BI and Tableau, they're more enterprise, so you'd have to have a license to be able to use them. Um, and then languages, I think if you've already started in Python or R, then either one will do the same thing for you. It's more a case of just learning how to um, find the information you need to be able to deliver it. So I find often it's just with Python, for example, it's learning how to use the language to be able to transform the data and then summarize it and be able to create visualizations that I can then use for the insights. So yeah, it's kind of a long way of going around it, but I think for me, it really comes down to what do you find interesting? And then what can you actually talk about with passion when you're discussing in an interview, for example?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about everything you've mentioned is that. So part of the reason we do this series is because HTML, CSS is only one way to get into tech. There are so many other roles, but
Yeah.
this role is particularly interesting because there are so many avenues to enter it. You can enter it being fairly good at using analytics tooling, but not necessarily knowing how to code. You can enter it with some coding and learn the analytics underneath. And it's just so broad and variable that it's actually makes it an incredibly accessible career. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's great. I'm really excited about that. I wanted to ask. So we've covered our off getting into this kind of role, but
Yeah.
once you're there, where do you go? What is sort of the progression of a data analyst?
That is a good question. I think for a lot of people that I've come across, they often go down either the technical route. So you want to become more specialized in, for example, visualization. So you'll learn the tools really well. You'll learn the all of the components that come with the visualization aspect. The implementation specialist will often go down like the tracking route. So you go from just using the tools, but being able to do the tracking custom or from scratch, or doing a server side for and then for the insights, it can often lead down to the data science route. So you'd often find people who pick up the data science modeling skills and then they'll be able to expand that to moving into a data science role. And actually now that's diverging to data science and data engineering. And then you have the ones who are more interested, as I say, to the client facing side. So it becomes more consultancy, but with a data focus. So you're primarily involved with delivering big projects, but also managing the different moving parts. So you use your technical knowledge as well as your client project management, I suppose, to deliver and work with big projects. And then you have like the management route, which you can go down. So you can choose to become a manager and you manage junior people and kind of like help train them and give them the guidance when needed.
Wow. Okay. Again, lots of avenues to
Yeah.
explore there. Really, really cool. I was quite interested. I had a look at some data analyst roles a couple of weeks ago, and I was very surprised at how many of them involved data pipelines. I do data engineering, so that's a lot of that's my job.
Yeah.
But these days the tooling is becoming so much more accessible that you're able to build, unless you're dealing with like gigs and gigs and terabytes of data, you
Yeah.
should be able to build a data pipeline and all of that on your own, essentially,
Absolutely.
without an engineer, which I don't know if that's good or bad for me yet. I haven't decided, but it makes it more and more accessible, and allows an analyst to spend their time actually analyzing and not necessarily trying to fix the data,
Yeah.
which is maybe something I want to ask you about. Is how much of your time do you spend having to wrangle data, having to clean data up?
Oh, oh God, that's a really good question. I think more recently I found that it would be a good 50-50 split. So
Okay.
50% of my time is spent on the pipeline. So we use, in some instances, cloud functions to be able to set up the API calls to collect the data. We use tools like Alteryx that will allow you to create pipelines, and it takes away a lot of the coding that's needed and the
Yeah,
management side of it. So you can create a pipeline, schedule it, and know that it's going to work. And it helps you
that's
do
the
all of the
key.
transformation. Yeah. Although it does sometimes break and then you have to go back and be like, where did this go wrong? Um, yes. So I think it is becoming more and more a mix of the two. And I
Mm,
guess going back to what I was saying earlier, it really depends on which role and what area you're focusing on. Because for some companies, you will do a bit of everything. For other companies, you'll be focused primarily on just one area and you might support here and there on other areas. But yeah, at the moment, it feels like it's 50-50. I spend far less time doing the model building and the insights pieces than I used to before.
yes. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Um, when you're looking for the jobs, is there anything in a role that one should specifically look out for as a red flag? And do you have any insight into what the salary range might be,
Yeah.
based on where you are?
In terms of red flags, I would say perhaps for me, the biggest thing is knowing what it is that I'm going to be doing
Mm,
if I join a company. So I find that if the job description is quite clear to understand what it is that I'm going to be doing, what they're asking, that is a good indication. And also speaking to the team and asking them what work are they currently working on. So I think it's good to just ask them about the general work, the general business, but also specifically what they're doing. And also, if you were to start at the company, what exactly would they have you doing right away? So you get an indication of, okay, this is the big pain points that they have, and this is what they're trying to bring someone in to be able to deliver. And then I guess for some data analyst roles that I've come across, it can be a little bit more data processing or data input, for example. So that is something to look out for, that when they say they're looking for an analyst, they actually need someone who's going to be doing the analysis or they're going to be building the dashboards if that's what they're looking for, not necessarily someone who's going to be taking data and then inputting it into the systems. And then in terms
yeah.
of range, it really varies again within the different companies and within different industries. But I generally find that it's focused around the skill sets. So for those that are very heavily based on programming or data engineering or data science, they have some data science elements. They tend to be a little bit on the higher end of the scale. But roughly, if I'm not mistaken, it's around about the 30 to 35 mark for the entry level. And then you can go from like the 35 to the 40, 45 mark for the senior levels. And then you can go up to much higher for some other roles. But with any job, always do your research. Have a look to see what other companies are offering. speak to recruiters, speak to other people in the industry and ask them what they're doing. And that gives you a good indication of what you can expect when you start working somewhere.
Perfect. Yes, I should get that on a t-shirt. Definitely make sure that you ask. So in terms of like interviewing, what does a data analyst interview consist of? What does that look like?
Generally, I think you tend to have the general meeting, or sorry, the interview where they want to get to know you, understand what your interests are and your expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'd often have a technical test, but that really varies. So for some roles, they will actually ask you to do some SQL, for example, if that's what they're expecting you to do day to day. For other roles, if they want you to do dashboard building, they might ask you to build something really simple in a dashboard. And that again is also quite simple. And I find there's a lot of tutorials if you wanted to learn about dashboarding that you can do, or YouTube videos that you can watch that gives you the fundamentals of how to do that. And then others, it'll just be a case of they want you to present your some of your work, and they want to see how you communicate your insights to a non-technical audience. So once you've done the insight, they just want to gauge that you can explain what you're doing. And I find with those ones especially, it's really important to be honest and say, this is what I know.
Yeah.
These are the things that I've learned and I've kind of like taken my time to learn about, but I'm not fully 100% there with. And these are the things that I think I need to learn. And I'm hoping it's something that I can do at the company.
Perfect. I think that's a really good point, because an analyst that isn't self-reflective might not be a very good analyst. So it's probably a good thing to show is that you are quite self-aware.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, but also, to be honest, because if a company isn't going to appreciate that, then you probably don't really want to work there. So excellent tips. Okay. So with that, we're going to go into round 2 of our quick fire.
I'm
But before we
ready.
do that, just a reminder that, we'll be sending out Nina's resources. That's going to include any videos or reading material that she has found useful on her journey. We will send that out afterwards. Okay, cool. Good to go?
Yep,
All
ready.
right. I like to do my dance before we do the thing. So, PC or Mac?
Oh, see, had you asked me a few years ago, I'd have said Mac, but now I'm PC.
Oh my gosh, why?
I'm just used to it now. Mac just feels too convenient.
Oh, too convenient.
I know.
Okay. I'm going to get that on a t-shirt too. Very nice. Okay, cool. Very interesting. Visual Studio Code or Jupyter Notebooks?
Visual Studio Code.
Okay, I did not
I
see
just
that
like that
coming.
I can do everything in one place. Although
Okay,
there's some packages that are quite fiddly, so I do often go back to Jupyter Notebook when I can.
cool. Okay, very interesting. Are you a mouse pad or a trackpad person?
Mouse pad. It's just easier.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I think it's the proximity of the wrist to the machine.
Oh yeah.
What is the best book that you have read recently?
Mm, I started listening to, so I tend to listen to audiobooks more.
Yes, that
The
counts
Black
too.
Swan by Nicholas. I think it's Nicholas Taleb. But yeah, it's really interesting. I think just hearing his philosophies and what his thoughts are, pretty cool.
Oh,
I'd
very
recommend
nice.
it.
Is it very different to the movie? Is it based on the movie? I mean, the book.
I don't
The
know.
movie is based on the book.
Oh no, I think this is more from an understanding of how certain uncertainty is measured currently and how the impact that has across our lives. So things like
Ah,
predicting
okay.
the, I don't know, stock market when you don't really foresee certain events happening and how people behave with those numbers. I think, yeah, it's really interesting for anyone who's into data. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yes, I was going to say, how very analytical of you.
I have to say, ever since I started working as an analyst, I've read far fewer novels, and I now just focus on like nonfiction, which I
Right.
need to switch over. So my creative brain is kind of starved at the moment.
Sure, sure. Okay, well that's okay. It's still very interesting. I think something with data analysis is it can be quite creative as well,
Yeah,
and very highly interesting, especially when you're looking at a particularly interesting problem or interesting data set. So I wouldn't worry too much
absolutely.
about that. Yeah, you're okay. You're okay. Are you a music while working person? Yes or no?
No, I will listen to like white noise or I'll listen to like background noise, but I'm not much of a because I get distracted with the lyrics and I end up sort of singing along or getting lost in my own thoughts. So I try not to have music.
Yes, yes. One thing I like working from home is no one's here to hear me sing. So that's cool. Okay, nice. And then this one you may have answered for me, these next two. Um, but if you had to choose Excel or SQL,
Oh, I think SQL. It's just so much easier to think in SQL terms, but there is something about Excel that's just really quick to do and really quick to get some numbers.
yeah, yeah, tough call. I find SQL gives you much more control, but
Yeah,
I've seen people do the most magnificent things in Excel that I just never would be able to reproduce myself. It's actually a really good tool,
it is.
very underrated.
Especially when you go into the macros and the VBA side, that suddenly
Yes,
you're just like, whoa, you can do that?
yeah, exactly. It's quite cool. Yeah, awesome. And then I probably know the answer to this one: Tableau or Google Data Studio.
Oh, Google Data Studio. Um,
Yes.
I just like free, convenient, and easy to use stuff.
Yeah. No, cool. Very nice. So we spoke about what you like to cook, but if you don't feel like cooking, what is your favorite thing to take away?
Sushi. I really like fish. So for me, sushi is like a big win. And for days that I feel like having a little bit of junk food, pizza.
Yeah, solid. Pizza's always good. Um, in terms of job ads, we spoke a little bit about them earlier.
Yeah.
What is the weirdest requirement you've ever seen on a job application?
Oh God, nothing comes to mind, which I'm glad because hopefully most of the data analytics jobs have been okay. Yeah, nothing jumps to mind.
No, no, that's good. That's good. Um, it's always interesting in a broad role like this
mm,
what people try and put into those roles. So I'm glad that you haven't had to deal with really strange things. And the last one is what is the best advice that you have received,
the best advice.
either in terms of life or
Question.
work or anything?
I think generally, a lot of people tend to say follow your passion, and I've also had the opposite, which is like, oh, actually, no, that's not really helpful because some people follow their passions and not really have anything come out of it. But for me, I think if you have an interest and you follow that, you're often more motivated to work in that on it and to work in that area, and
Mm.
you're a little bit more intrigued. You want to learn more, so it just pushes you. So it becomes less about the work itself and more about the process.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say following your interests and of course working hard, but following your interests that kind of just lends itself really well if you're doing something that you enjoy.
Okay. Cool. Very nice. Thank you so much. And you can relax. That's it. It's not very complex. The last things we wanted to cover, something that I hear a lot when I speak to
Yeah.
people who work with data and not just shoving it from A to B, which is what I do. I often hear the phrase tell a story with the
Oh yes.
data. Please, can you enlighten me as to what this
Data
means and how to
storytelling.
do it?
Oh, data storytelling. It's become a big catchword. I think generally it just means like how you explain what you've done to a non-technical audience often. And I think news outlets are really good at this. So if you have a look at, for example, The Guardian or The Telegraph or BBC, you'll see that the way that they incorporate visualization ties in with what they're trying to tell, the narrative of the story. And for me, I think that's what you're trying to say. So, for example, if I have a business question that wants to know how we're doing as far as revenue for the last campaign, it's taking them from the start of the journey and saying like, okay, when we started, this is the campaign that you did. These are the things that were involved with different components. And then this is how much we've generated as far as revenue. And these are the things that have contributed to it. So you're almost like taking them through that journey of saying, this is where we were, and this is the information that you want, but these are all the things that have influenced it along the way. And I know there are now like a lot of courses around data storytelling specifically, and you'll find a lot of the big visualization tools will deliver their own training on this. But yeah, I find the best ones are the news outlets, that they kind of have cracked it in terms of how you use the visualizations, especially to be able to convey information.
Okay. Yes, that makes a lot more sense. Thank you very much. It's very common phrase, and
It is, yeah.
never really quite made sense.
It's also a bit of a catchphrase that I think people use a lot.
No, you spot on. Yeah, data storytelling. Yeah. Okay. And then something similar you mentioned. Someone's asked here, how do you build your ability to frame the question, and as you put it, translate that to a business problem?
Yeah, I think that comes with experience. So when I started, this is something that I didn't really fully understand. And often I would struggle with, just to be like, well, what exactly are they asking for? Do they want me to give them the total? Do they want me to give them the mean? It's often quite confusing. But the more you work on projects, the more you get an understanding of what data fits in with what question. So to give you an example, one of our clients wanted to get like an overhaul of the data digital strategy. So we went from the goal of the business, which is, for example, increase revenue, and then we work on the objectives. Well, what is it that you're going to do to be able to increase the revenue? So they'll say, okay, marketing will do this, sale will do this, like partnerships will do this. Then you go out like a bit more and say, okay, for the marketing specifically, what is it that you're going to be doing, and how will you track that to be able to get the information you need? So they'll say, okay, we'll have a digital campaign. So you'll take the digital campaign, say, we'll look at things like reach, impressions, the number of clicks that we've had, the number of comments that we've had, and that shows an engagement with the campaign. And then the output of that is, for example, conversion. And conversion can be sales, but it can also be things like newsletter signups. It can be things like we've received more downloads for a particular report that we put together. So you kind of tie it all the way from the business goal to what it is that you're going to be doing and what information you're going to be using to infer that whether you reach the goal or not.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And then the last thing, we've spoken about how you got into tech, how somebody else can take data analysis, how somebody else can do that. It is tech. What is next on the horizon for you? What are you excited to work on next, and what are you excited to be learning next?
Oh, that's a really tough question, because I think, as I mentioned, there's like quite a few different routes that you can follow. So I'm torn between getting a little bit more management experience, but I also don't want to separate myself away from the technical delivery side. So I'm probably going to try and keep the two as much as I can until a point where I have to make a decision. And I'm also currently studying Islamic sciences part-time. And for me, I'm interested in the cross section between like information acquisition, information availability, and how people find it, as well as the technical, like artificial intelligence, data science, and data analytics, and seeing how they cross over. So yeah, I think there might be down the line, maybe in 10 years' time, the option to merge the two together. But for now, I think, yes, focusing more on the technical and the management side.
Okay, lots to look forward to. Awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure hosting you tonight. Thank you so much for your time and for all your information. It's very, very much appreciated.
That's gone by so quickly, but yeah, thank you all so much for organizing this.
Yeah,
and for having me.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Nina. Thank you so much.